So far we have covered an overview of all Exalted editions, we have covered the world building and the controversies, and we have even covered the player experience. In this video we're going to talk about rules. All editions of Exalted are crunchy games, and if I were to delve into every aspect of the rules for every edition, this video would never end. Instead, I'm going to focus on what I believe are some of the core aspects of the Exalted experience. Combat, mass combat, social influence and crafting. I'm going to place most of the focus there. Exalted uses a variant of the storytelling game system designed by Mark Reynhagen, but reiterated to fit the high-power fantasy that Exalted is. It uses pools of 10-sided dice where players combine attributes with abilities to determine the size of these dice pools. If your dice meet a certain target number, typically 7 or higher, those dice are considered successful. If you roll a 10, it's considered 2 successes. To overcome challenges in a game of Exalted, you need to acquire as many successes as those challenges dictate. This has always been the foundation for the storytelling game system and has carried through all editions of Exalted. The differences are in the details. For example, compared to 3rd edition and Exalted Essence, 1st and 2nd edition don't utilize range bands for positioning in combat. Instead, ranges are defined by exact measurements. These two editions also treat action flurries differently from later editions. You first subtract dice from your first action equal to the total number of actions you want to take, then subtract an additional die for each following action. You can make as many actions as you have dice to spare. In 3rd edition and Exalted Essence, you can make a maximum of 2 actions at a -3 penalty. In 3rd edition, this must be 2 different types of actions, so you can't attack twice, but there is no such restriction in Exalted Essence. All Exalted editions have some shared character traits, such as an essence rating and motes, though Exalted Essence doesn't have a willpower trait and 3rd edition doesn't make use of virtues. I went over many of these character traits in the previous video, so I won't focus on those here. Instead, I'm going to focus more on the rules themselves and how they differ. But before we go any further into this video, I once again want to let you all know about the community content I made for Exalted 3rd edition on the Storyteller's Vault. Ghost has rules for playing ghosts, including Deathlords, as well as new merits and over 200 Paranoia on 76 pages. Even if you're not interested in playing ghosts, there are 94 Paranoia with Eclipse keyword that you can use for a solar character. I have other community content on there as well, so be sure to check it out. If you like any of it, please leave a review as well. Also, I once again want to mention NFL's Dice Shop. Keep in mind that the D10s are all handmade and custom made, and they come in many different designs, such as my favorites, the Cursed Blood one and the Elemental Flower one. If you buy the larger packages, the dice come in high quality display packaging too. If you use the affiliate link in the description, any dice you order from the shop will help me out. Anyway, let's get on with the video. Stunts have been an important part of Exalted in all editions, but how they are performed and the rewards that are given have some slight variations. 1st edition has a 3-point stunt system, similar to 2nd and 3rd edition, where you can be rewarded 1, 2 or 3 dice, as well as motes of essence, depending on how well received the stunt is by the group. When your stunt is worth 2 or 3 points, you may decide to recover willpower in place of motes. 1st edition is the one that goes the most into depth about what stunts are and how the storyteller should adjudicate them. 3rd edition has next to no storyteller advice in it, leaving many of these rules to interpretation. Exalted Essence tries something new with stunts. Instead of grading the stunts on a 3-point scale, you always earn a stunt regardless of how evocative or impressive it is. This means that you gain 2 dice that you can either cash in immediately to improve the roll, or you can choose to hold the dice and apply them to a later roll. You can even choose to give them to another player. Stunt dice can also be cashed in for resources such as power and will, which are exclusive to Exalted Essence, or you can spend them to make dramatic edits to the scene, modifying the narrative in your favor, or instantly learn a new charm. I find the way that Exalted Essence handles stunts to be the best out of all editions. While it can be fun to grade the stunts and feel the impact of those rare 3-pointers, stunting is a skill that some players will excel at more than others. By making all stunts of equal value and giving players options of sharing their stunt rewards with their fellow players, stunting becomes fairer and more rewarding for the group as a whole. Combat in 1st and 2nd edition is a very different experience from 3rd edition and Exalted Essence. Like I mentioned before, distances and positioning aren't abstracted like in later editions, but one of the major differences is how the editions handle initiative, attacks, and defenses. In first edition, your base initiative is equal to the sum of your dexterity plus wits, and this may be adjusted up or down depending on the weapon used. Every turn, each player rolls a d10 and adds their initiative rating. This determines the turn order. Exceptions to this are if a character delays their action and chooses to act later than the rolled initiative, or when the character makes a full dodge or aborts to a parry, both of which the character may do before the rolled initiative. You attack by rolling dexterity plus combat ability, and you need a single success unless the defender parries or dodges. Defending in first edition isn't automatic like in later editions. It's tactical and, in my opinion, annoying, as you must rely on certain charms if you want to get around some of the limitations. If you want to parry an attack, you can choose to either abort to parry, which lets you parry a single attack but not do anything else on your turn, or choose not to parry until it's your turn. When it is your turn, you can choose to split your pool to parry multiple attacks made against you, but it's also possible that no new attacks will target you. Dodge functions the same way, but relies on dexterity plus dodge. The difference is that instead of aborting to parry, you can abort to a full dodge, which lets you attempt to dodge multiple attacks at a cumulative penalty. The Player's Guide supplement introduced full parry to make parrying work exactly like dodging, but this wasn't the case in the core book. In first edition, you sometimes had to rely on soaking attacks without defending against them to try to eventually get the upper hand, but many fights had characters with faster weapons corner those with slower weapons and forcing them into defensive positions that could be difficult to recover from. When successfully attacking someone in first edition, you inflict attack's base damage plus the number of successes remaining after defenses have been applied. This becomes raw damage and can be either bashing, lethal, or aggravated, where bashing heals more quickly and knocks people out instead of killing them, lethal kills when incapacitating someone, and aggravated is a special damage type often caused by magical effects. The raw damage is compared to the target's soak, which can then be associated with either bashing or lethal damage. Only supernatural beings like Exalts can use stamina to soak lethal damage. Aggravated damage can never be soaked using stamina. Raw damage cannot be reduced below 1 regardless of soak. Finally, you roll a die for each remaining success to determine how much damage you inflict. Rolling a 10 counts as a single success for this purpose. When damaging someone, the target can suffer wound penalties which also affect their movement speed. When they are dying, they will do so in a number of turns equal to their stamina, with any extra damage levels beyond the incapacitated shortening this duration by 1 turn per damage level. If a character has suffered lethal damage, they are bleeding and will lose additional health levels every few minutes unless their wounds are staunched. An Exalt can staunch their wounds by making a stamina roll at difficulty 1. Finally, the character must also make stamina plus resistance rolls to see if lethal wounds become infected. If the wounds are undressed and untreated, this may require several rolls. An Exalt with infected wounds must roll stamina plus endurance at difficulty 1 every morning. If they fail, they become feverish and ill, suffering a -2 penalty to all dice pools. In second edition, you enter combat by declaring Joan Battle, which is rolled using wits plus awareness. The highest number of successes rolled by anyone in the scene determines the reaction count. The combatants gain a first action value equal to the reaction count minus their successes to maximum 6. The fastest character, the one with first action 0, acts first. After a character takes their first action, they must wait for a number of ticks equal to the speed of their action, meaning that characters with faster actions get to act more often than those with slower actions. Second edition helps visualize this by introducing the speed wheel with numbers ranging from 0 to 6, the reaction count. Attacking and damaging in second edition is functionally the same as in first edition, but the active defenses have been replaced with a passive defense called a DV, defense value. The character has a dodge DV as well as a parry DV. Many actions taken in combat can reduce your own DV until refreshed on your turn. If attacked multiple times, your DV is reduced with each attack, making you overwhelmed and easier to hit when facing multiple strikes. While successful attacks and damage are functional the same as in first edition, second edition added hardness as a form of magical defense. Before subtracting soak from the raw damage must be determined to be at least 1 higher than the target's hardness. If it is, soak is applied like normal. If it isn't, the attack fails to inflict any damage. Second edition also have rules for bleeding and infection like first edition with slight variations. Finally, second edition also introduces charms that act as perfect defenses. Each perfect defense is tied to the character's flaws of invulnerability. These are tied to the 4 virtues and offer conditions forced upon the Exalt after using a perfect defense. The Valor flaw forces the Exalt to move towards the opponent they consider the most dangerous until their DV refreshes twice. The Compassion flaw limits the use of the perfect defense to situations when someone the Exalt cares about are in the scene. The Temperance flaw prohibits the Exalt from taking movement actions until their DV refreshes twice, and the Conviction flaw cannot be used if the action goes contrary to their motivation. This is changed in the Scroll of Errata to encompass any action during the scene that goes contrary to the motivation. While the introduction of perfect attacks and defenses spawned what during 2nd edition came to be called Paranoia combat, where you more or less had to get certain charms and create certain combos to engage in higher tier Exalted battles, the introduction of DVs instead of active defense actions made combat run much more smoothly than in 1st edition. It also made the character feel more powerful as you could focus on offense instead of running the risk of being cornered. With the introduction of speed, faster weapons still meant fewer ticks between attacks, reaching what I feel is a fair compromise where you get to feel fast and deadly while not completely negating the opponent's ability to turn the battle around. The Paranoia combat is what ruined 2nd edition combat for me, not the combat structure itself. In 3rd edition, initiative is central to the entire combat engine. You start battle by making a young battle roll, like 2nd edition, by rolling wits plus awareness. Though there are charms that may let you sometimes roll using different traits. Your starting initiative is equal to the successes roll plus 3. Throughout the fight, combatants can make a type of attack action called a Withering attack, where you may reduce the initiative values of your opponents while raising your own. This makes the turn order dynamic. If you want to eventually take out your opponent, you can make a decisive attack that uses your current initiative as a damage pool. 3rd edition uses passive defense values like 2nd edition, but calls them evasion and parry instead of dodge and parry DV. A Withering attack is structured in a way much like 1st and 2nd edition by having the attacker roll dexterity plus combat ability plus the weapon's accuracy against the defender's defense. Any threshold successes are added to strength and the weapon's damage rating, which in 3rd edition is a fairly high value compared to previous editions. The defender's soak subtracts from the raw damage, and what remains are rolled as damage dice. If no damage remains, the attacker still gets to roll a number of dice equal to their weapon's overwhelming value. Any 10s rolled are doubled, but inflicted damage doesn't cause physical harm. Instead, it reduces the target's initiative and gives it to the attacker. A successful attack gives 1 initiative to the attacker, and they gain all the initiative that they reduce from their opponent. If this causes the defender's initiative to reach 0 or below, they enter initiative crash, and the attacker gains an additional 5 initiative. The idea behind Withering attacks is to emulate dynamic and over-the-top fights where you wither opponents to set up the conditions for a decisive attack. When you want to make a decisive attack in 3rd edition, you roll dexterity plus combat ability but not the weapon's accuracy against their defense. If you succeed, you compare your total initiative with the target's hardness, though if they are crashed they cannot make use of their hardness. If higher, you roll dice equal to your total initiative, with every success inflicting a level of physical damage. Here, 10s count as single successes. If the attack is successful, the initiative is spent and resets to 3, which is the base value. This system can give you very high damage pools if you are withered the opponent a lot in battle. Damage is still divided into bashing, lethal and aggravated, but there are no more rules for bleeding and infections. This system does a good job at emulating dynamic battles, but it's also flawed in several ways. Because the initiative value is tied to you and not a dynamic between you and your opponent, you can save up initiative from lesser foes and use it against the greater foe. Also, if you outnumber your opponents, it's easy to wither them down and prevent them from gaining any initiative at all, effectively making them unable to harm you. Most of the written antagonists have underwhelming defensive measures, if any at all, which can be frustrating, especially when you want to put the pieces up against a singular enemy. To make 3rd edition combat fun and exciting, a lot of pressure is put on the storyteller to come up with twists and turns to make things dynamic, so that you can avoid one-sided situations. I have 2 videos covering combat approaches on this channel. One of them approaches combat more generally, while the other focuses on boss fights. Many critics also argue that separating attacks into withering and decisive forms aren't intuitive and detracts from immersion. While it feels like 2 different attack forms add complexity to combat, 3rd edition has streamlined combat in many ways when compared to previous editions. I personally prefer it to the 2, but the issues that exist are deal breakers unless you've experienced them and use creative approaches to overcome them. Since the 3rd edition core book is poorly written and doesn't have any storyteller advice, the bar to enter is higher when it comes to 3rd edition combat, even though it handles better than both 1st and 2nd edition combat. Exalted Essence is more closely related to the combat rules in 3rd edition than to the earlier editions, but the way it handles initiative and turn order is completely different. You start by determining how many opposing sides there are in the conflict, typically 2, the PC side against the storyteller side. Everyone rolls joint battle, which can be rolled using any attribute plus combat ability, but the one that gets the highest value wins for their entire side. The person who goes first decides who goes second. When everyone in the winning side has acted, the losing side gets to act. The side that ends the round chooses who starts the next round. The storyteller can choose to have certain important storyteller characters interrupt the turn order when dramatically appropriate. While Exalted Essence is similar to 3rd edition, the similarities more or less end after the fact that there are withering and decisive attacks even here, though instead of relying on initiative like 3rd edition, it introduces the concept of power. This works similar to how initiative worked before, but is no longer related to the turn order. Regardless of which attack form is used, you roll an attribute plus combat ability plus dice-based modifiers. After the roll you add success-based modifiers. The result is compared to the target's defense, which can be parry or evasion like in 3rd edition, with the difference being that instead of using dexterity, which doesn't exist in Exalted Essence, you may apply your highest, most appropriate attribute. If the attack meets or exceeds defense, it hits. If it's a withering attack, hitting the target gives you 1 power for meeting defense, and any extra successes after defense are converted directly to additional power. This doesn't reduce the opponent's power like how initiative works in 3rd edition. The target's defense cannot reduce the extra successes below the weapon's overwhelming value. You can have a maximum of 10 power stored. If the attack is decisive, overcoming defense means that you form a damage pool equal to the amount of power you want to spend on an attack, plus extra successes over defense, plus other modifiers if there are any. You then roll these as dice and subtract successes equal to the target's soak. If there are any successes left after soak, this determines the inflicted damage. You must spend at least as many power as the target has hardness. Hardness increases as characters increase in essence, but it's possible to temporarily reduce someone's hardness by overwhelming them with concentrated withering attacks during the same round, penalizing their hardness with each attack. Exalted Essence is the only edition that doesn't separate damage into bashing, lethal and aggravated forms, instead having 1 damage form. Damage otherwise works much the same with health levels and wound penalties. When becoming incapacitated in Exalted Essence, the character can still take limited actions, but they cannot build power for themselves, make decisive attacks, control a grapple, clash or flurry. If the group has agreed that the fight should have a risk for permanent character death, an incapacitated character is dying and must be stabilized by a simple sagacity roll. In Exalted Essence, there is also the option of taking a dramatic injury instead of becoming incapacitated. This introduces a different setback than simply the injury itself, inflicting a penalty to an attribute or primary or secondary merit, such as getting a persistent limp that penalizes your finesse or causing your soldiers to distrust your command, penalizing your command merit. Withering attacks in Exalted Essence are much simpler to run than in 3rd edition, and the fact that you don't drain power from the opponent means that you're less likely to run into situations when you completely negate an opponent's options to strike back. This makes combat in Exalted Essence more engaging than in 3rd edition. Also, the fact that you choose how much power to spend instead of being forced to spend all of it is also a good change, since then you can choose to spend less power on lesser enemies. Comparing that to 3rd edition, where you're forced to spend all of it, makes it so you can expect more decisive attacks in Exalted Essence than a typical 3rd edition battle. I have some gripes with Exalted Essence that makes me prefer 3rd edition overall, but changing initiative into power is not one of them. This fixes most of the issues I have with 3rd edition combat. Exalted Essence also introduces a build power action that lets characters use non-combat options to accrue power. This also makes characters with less of a combat focus valuable in a fight, since they can use their own strengths to gain power, such as social actions to throw insults, and then use the power exchange action to transfer their own power to an attacking ally. It's important to remember that Exalted Essence isn't a rules light version of Exalted 3rd edition, it's a very rules heavy game. It streamlines 3rd edition through complexity rather than simplicity. It fixes issues, streamlines rules and the flow of battle, while adding new features that complement the new structure. It's a better written core book with plenty of storyteller guidance, lowering the bar to entry. But, and this is a big but and I cannot lie, it appears at times as if the developers of Exalted Essence weren't sure if they wanted to make a rules light version or simply a streamlined version. While the rules themselves haven't been simplified, and some aspects of the game have gained additional complexity, there are other aspects of the game that have been remarkably simplified when they need to have been. I talked a bit about this in the previous video. Exalted 1st edition didn't have any rules for mass combat and warfare in the core book. This was later added in the player's guide with the so-called Mail and Steel expansion. In the core book there were guidelines on how many enemies a character could face at a time in a specific environment, but a game like Exalted needed rules for facing hundreds or even thousands of foes. Mail and Steel was convoluted and over-designed. I'll try to hastily summarize some of it. First, mass combat in 1st edition makes use of long turns, which are roughly 3 minutes in length. During a long turn, a character can take 3 individual turns worth of actions. These are represented by 3 combat sequences during which units can act. Individual characters who engage in mass combat but aren't fighting in larger formations are called solo units. Other units are represented as singular characters but have their traits modified in different ways. How these traits should be modified depends on the unit's magnitude, which is determined by its size. A magnitude 1 unit is comprised of 2 to 10 individuals, magnitude 2 is 11 to 75, magnitude 3 is 76 to 150, etc. and etc. up until magnitude 9, which is comprised of 5001 to 10,000 members. The book points out that larger armies are often divided into smaller units. For example, a First Age Legion would be more likely to make use of 10 magnitude 5 units instead of a single magnitude 9 unit. When attacking, a larger unit adds the difference in magnitude between them and their opponent as automatic successes. A smaller attacking unit subtracts successes instead. A unit also benefits from an attack bonus equal to half the normal combat pool, a damage bonus equal to a third, and an armor trait equal to a third of their lethal soak that is added to the normal soak when subtracting damage. Units also have a drill rating ranging from 0 to 5 that represents their training, as well as a might rating that also ranges from 0 to 5 and represents supernatural power. Drill helps the unit maintain formation and morale, while might is directly added to their attack rolls as well as to the unit leader's effective essence rating. Mass combat units also have a defined order depending on how close they are to each other, such as close order, relaxed order, skirmish order, and unordered. Depending on the order used, the units get situational benefits or penalties. There are also rules for unit movement, how terrain affects movement, how magnitude affects movement, how to treat mounted units and flying units, how to turn the marching order into a different direction, how to disengage, how to split units, and how to consolidate them. There are a lot of rules. 2nd edition relied on much the same mass combat rules, but streamlined a lot of the bloat and structured it all in a more forgiving way. It also added it all to the core book. It changed some terms and made the 16 pages of rules in 1st edition much more digestible. It was still largely a convoluted mess though. In comes 3rd edition and streamlines mass combat rules in a way that's easy to manage, requires no prep work, and interacts well with the normal combat system. In 3rd edition, mass combat units are called battle groups. The system uses size instead of magnitude to determine how large the units are, with size 0 representing 1 or 2 fighters and size 5 representing a full army. The term magnitude is still around, but now refers to the health levels belonging to the battle group. The group size adds its rating in dice to attack pools, raw damage, and soak, as well as extra levels of magnitude. The group's drill rating can still range from poor to average and to elite. A battle group with poor drill suffers a -2 penalty to order and rally for numbers actions, and they raise the difficulty for route and rally checks by 1. A battle group with average drill inflicts no penalty and benefits from +1 to defense. A battle group with elite drill adds a +2 bonus to command rolls and +2 to defense. Another term that's still around in 3rd edition is might, this time ranging from 0 to 3. Might still represents supernatural power. At might 1, the battle group gains a +1 bonus to accuracy and damage as well as +1 to defense. At might 2, it gains a +2 bonus to accuracy and damage and still +1 to defense. Finally, at might 3, the battle group gets a +3 bonus to accuracy and damage as well as +2 to defense. Battle groups in 3rd edition don't make use of long turns or ticks. They use the same combat system as normal characters and act much like individual characters, apart from a few differences. One of these differences is that they don't rely on initiative. This makes them challenging foes for PCs who can't wither them down for easy initiative. Instead, PCs gain 1 initiative for hitting them and a crash bonus from reducing their size. When successfully attacking them, they suffer magnitude damage instead, and risk reducing size when their magnitude runs out. The battle group, however, can still inflict initiative damage to a PC, but when the PC is crashed, any additional damage is automatically counted as physical damage. In other words, if you're brought low by a battle group, you risk suffering some serious harm. This mass combat system is much more engaging than the convoluted mess that was 1st and 2nd edition, and it integrates well with 3rd edition's combat system. You can seamlessly combine singular foes with battle groups to make more interesting combat scenarios. And because most of 3rd edition's flaws are related to its initiative system, the fact that battle groups don't have initiative makes them at times better antagonists than single bosses. Exalted Essence simplifies things even further. It only relies on the size and drill traits, where size ranges from 0 to 5 just like in 3rd edition and determines the group's health levels and overwhelming rating. Drill, on the other hand, determines most of the dice bonuses, such as attempts to build power, their leader's command rolls, route checks, as well as their attack and damage rolls. Exalted Essence also gives the storyteller more option to improvise bonuses and traits to make the battle group stand out. For example, instead of having a separate might rating, the storyteller can simply give the group an additional trait or some extra bonuses to represent the supernatural quality. 1st edition didn't have any in-depth social rules. Instead, it provided some suggestions for how to treat certain forms of social interaction, such as how to determine difficulty for a seduction attempt or how to persuade someone. For example, converting someone to a new way of thinking was a high difficulty extended action, while a normal persuasion attempt was a simple roll. 1st edition didn't really go deeper into social intrigue than this. While 1st edition had next to no social system, 2nd edition went too far in the other direction. They converted their combat rules to fit social actions, having the scene start with a joint debate roll instead of a joint battle roll. Each social action had a speed rating and interacted with the speed wheel, just like a physical battle would. Attacks had to overcome a dodge or parry MDV, mental defense value. To make a social attack in 2nd edition, you first declare the attack like normal, such as stating that you were making a charisma plus presence based attack. The defender then declared defense, referring to dodge MDV if they wanted to stubbornly refuse, or parry MDV if they wanted to object and argue. The attacker then rolled, compared the result to the MDV, and, if successful, compelled a certain behavior or forced willful resistance. The defender, after having failed to defend against the social attack, had to either consent to the attack and perform the behavior, or pay a willpower point to refuse. If consenting to the attack would violate their motivation, they had to refuse. If they didn't have willpower to spend, they still had to abide. There is more to the social combat system than this, but this is the essence of it. While it made social traits more mechanically useful than they were in 1st edition, the system wasn't intuitive for the types of scenes they were meant to portray. Instead of role-playing the social exchanges, players had to take a step back to instead engage in a structured gameplay that interrupted narrative flow and often went against rational character behavior. It completely stripped the roleplay away from drama and intrigue. In the years I played 2nd edition, I mostly ignored the social combat rules and simply rolled social attacks against MDV when appropriate. The changes introduced in 3rd edition mostly resolved the issues I had and were more in line with how I wanted to run social influence in game. It removed the timing associated with a specific order of action and allowed for more fluent social exchange. Instead of having a dodge and parry MDV, 3rd edition introduced Resolve and Guile, where Resolve represented mental fortitude and Guile represented the ability to conceal thoughts and feelings. Resolve could be modified up or down by the character's intimacies, and part of the intrigue was to try to figure out an opponent's intimacies so that you could use them in your favor. 3rd edition also introduced the Red Rule. Like I mentioned in a previous video, Exalted had its share of controversies, and one controversy was that the rules, and many of the charms, could be used to compel characters into unwanted sexual situations. 1st edition was especially bad at this, since they had rules specifically for seduction and listed suggested difficulty modifiers if you wanted to seduce someone who wouldn't normally be attracted to you. The Red Rule declared that social influence actions can only take effect if the affected character's player consents to the compelled behavior. If they aren't comfortable with the influence, their agency cannot be taken from them. The Red Rule can be said to be common sense for most people, but it still needs to be said and enforced, especially in a game like Exalted, where characters are capable of superhuman feats and social expressions akin to brainwashing. Exalted Essence reintroduced virtues and have them drive an Exalt's actions, as well as be the lens through which a character's intimacies are viewed. For example, a character with a justice virtue could have intimacies related to righting wrongs or seeking revenge. They are largely narrative in function and irrelevant in practice. I don't really see the point of bringing them back, since intimacies alone can represent the character's personality and goals. It felt like they were brought back only for the purpose of bringing them back. Social influence in Exalted Essence is structured similar to 3rd edition in that you roll a social ability, such as Embassy or Presence, and targets defend using their Resolve. Virtues and intimacies can modify Resolve if they align with the situation. How virtues and intimacies relate to and modify Resolve is exactly the same, further proving that virtues were an unnecessary addition. Intimacies already cover this design space. In 1st edition, crafting something was a 3-step process. First, the character had to plan the project as an extended intelligence plus craft roll. In 1st edition, characters had different craft abilities for different crafting types. It was up to the player to decide how long they wanted to plan, and they could continue to accumulate successes, but the duration between each roll increased after each one. So, if you rushed a project, you'd go in with fewer successes than if you took your time to plan it out. Second, the character had to assess the materials needed. This required a perception plus craft roll. Third, the character set out to do the actual construction as an extended dexterity plus craft roll or intelligence plus craft if it was a large project. Just like when planning the project, the player could make as many rolls as they wished, but they couldn't continue rolling after having accumulated successes equal to their intelligence plus craft. If the character wanted to create a magical item, they needed access to the 5 magical materials, Jade, Orichalcum, Moonsilver, Star Metal or Soul Steel, and they had to have at least 3 in lore, occult and appropriate craft ability. The rules for crafting magical items were the same as for normal items, but the process took longer. The difficulty also increased if the character crafted with another material than the one they resonated with. If the character instead wanted to create a manse, they had to have lore, occult and craft architecture at 4 or higher. 2nd edition simplified crafting when compared to 1st edition. Characters no longer needed to have specific craft abilities, instead all crafting types were associated with one of the 5 elements, and there was 1 craft ability per element. To design and execute a project, the player rolled the lowest of dexterity, perception or intelligence plus craft for small items, or the lower of perception or intelligence plus craft for larger works. The difficulty was equal to the resources value of the object. The storyteller determined the length of time the project would take. If the roll failed to meet the difficulty, the object's final resources value would be reduced by an amount determined by how many successes were missing from a successful roll. The character could then decide to try again over a new interval of time, but this required the same resources cost of tools and materials as if they were starting over. If the character instead succeeded on the roll, the success threshold determines the quality of the work relative to the difficulty. If they succeed by 3 or 4, the object was observably better and considered fine. If the character succeeded by 5, the object was exceptional. To make a perfect object without the use of magic, the difficulty and creation time had to equal the resources cost of an average item plus 5, and the cost in materials equal to the cost of an average version plus 2 dots, maximum resources 5. Creating artifacts require a craft lore and occult rating of 3 or higher for artifacts rated 1 to 3. For greater artifacts, the ability required is equal to the artifact rating plus 2, making this impossible for someone without superhuman powers. Artifacts require extended rolls with a difficulty equal to the artifact's intended rating plus 2. If an Exalt tried to craft using a magical material it didn't resonate with, they would suffer -2 internal penalty. The intervals of time were longer as well, with 1 roll per season and 10 accumulated successes for rating 1, 30 for 2, 60 for 3, 100 for 4 and 250 for 5. While 2nd edition streamlined crafting compared to 1st edition, it still suffered from being an off-time activity without narrative value. If you wanted to create a cool new artifact, you'd have to spend possibly years of in-game time accumulating successes. It wasn't dramatic enough to be worth it. 3rd edition tried to rectify this by making it more dramatic, but they ended up making it worse, much worse. First, 3rd edition returned to having many craft abilities like in 1st edition. Second, crafting in 3rd edition wasn't an interpretation of the base rules, but a secondary subsystem with its own resource management. There are 4 types of crafting projects. Basic projects are simple tasks such as making a chair or shoeing a horse. Major projects are significant tasks such as forging arms or sculpting a statue. Superior projects are either large-scale constructions such as building a warship or raising a palace, or they could represent artifact creation. Finally, legendary projects deal with the mightiest works of magical artifice, such as first-stage creations. Everything is great so far. The concerns are project slots and crafting experience. A project slot represents the number of simultaneous crafting projects you can undertake. Normally, a character starts with 3 major slots, meaning that they can undertake 3 major projects. Charms can give extra slots, but you can also purchase temporary slots by spending crafting experience. Crafting experience comes in 3 forms: silver, gold and white. To earn silver experience, you must complete a basic project. To earn gold experience, you must complete a major project. If you have no more slots to begin a new major project, you can spend silver experience to temporarily open one. If you want to create an artifact, you need to start a superior project, but you don't have any superior crafting slots to use. Instead, you must temporarily fuse together a number of major slots equal to the rating of the artifact you want to create and spend a number of gold experience points equal to the artifact's rating. So, a 3-dot artifact requires 3 major slots fused into a superior slot as well as 3 gold experience points. Your major slots are full, start making buckets of nails. Now, if you actually complete the superior project, you earn white experience points. You can use 5 white points to begin a legendary project. How many superior slots do you need to fuse? 3? No. We're not going to be consistent in this system. Pay the 5 white points and you have your slot. How this system got past playtesting is beyond me, because it's almost universally hated. The problems with the crafting system are further emphasized in the solar charms, where there are 53 charms for craft alone in the core book. Many of these interact with project slots, crafting experience, and the dice pool without any narrative elements to them, making it the most bloat-heavy charm tree in the history of Exalted. Craft charms were made more interesting in later supplements, but the system itself would need an overhaul. The current Exalted development team are well aware of the problems with 3rd edition's crafting system, which is why more modern charms are largely moving away from interacting with project slots and crafting experience. Exalted Essence tried an entirely new approach by weaving crafting into other project forms. They did this by incorporating ventures. A venture encompasses any type of action that would require more time and effort than a simple roll. First, you need to determine what kind of venture it is and what abilities or other traits are necessary to attempt it. Every roll made in the venture represents a significant obstacle of some kind. At the start of a venture, the storyteller defines the minimum number of obstacles encompassed by the venture, but these may increase or decrease based on narrative events and in-game decisions. Generally, between 2 and 5 obstacles are appropriate for most ventures. An initial obstacle could be something like drawing a schematic, gathering materials, or finding the location of an appropriate workshop. Maybe you need to overcome an obstacle to get your hands on the actual materials or workshop. The storyteller could define an obstacle at a time or make a list of obstacles that the players can then tackle in any order they want. This is all determined by what makes sense for the type of venture you're on. The venture's timescale defines how often the player can roll for each obstacle, such as you need to spend X amount of days or hours working on the construction, or you need to spend a week traveling to the location where you get what you need to continue the work. The design goal with ventures is to make projects more narrative than mechanical, and to introduce dramatic scenes that directly interacts with the project. But it's also possible to have certain obstacles taken care of as downtime activities. If the player succeeds on a roll, they may spend extra successes on advantages based on the venture type. This could be bonus dice on the next obstacle, additional features added to a craft, or even narrative benefits. Failing on a roll progresses the venture like normal, but some kind of consequence is introduced. As an unlucky mirror to the advantages, consequences could make upcoming obstacles more difficult, introduce flaws to the craft, or maybe attract unwanted attention. Exalted Essence offers some suggestions for how to use ventures for crafting related actions. One such suggestion is to have the creation of a personal scale mundane item be represented by a 1 scene timescale and 2 base obstacles, such as materials and tools. Common advantages could be to improve the object's durability or that it gives an intimacy to the one who receives it. Common consequences could be altered item traits or a tarnished reputation. Artifact creation has more obstacles and higher stakes, and it also requires the Wonder Crafting Initiation charm. Ventures is a simple system, but it's all you really need for a crafting system. I think that out of all 4 editions, Exalted Essence is the one that's the most immersive and intuitive. It doesn't require a bunch of specialized craft abilities or convoluted subsystems of project slots and crafting experience. And while 2nd edition did a lot of things right when it comes to crafting rules, it focused too much on the time of construction itself, making it almost exclusively a downtime activity. Ventures focus on diverse obstacles, making every project feel different, but also seamlessly incorporates the project within the game's narrative. A video like this will be divisive because people like different things. I have most experience with 2nd edition and 3rd edition since 1st edition was already over when I started playing and Exalted Essence is still new. There are also many rules, so I had to focus on a few things in this video while leaving out other topics worth addressing. I still think that there are pros and cons with all editions, making it impossible to point at a single one and say that this one is best. A lot of people point at 3rd edition as an example of a game that's overly designed and too crunchy, but I don't think that's true. I think that 3rd edition plays much more smoothly and intuitively than both 1st and 2nd edition. With the exception being the crafting rules, which are just bad, and the fact that the book is poorly written, difficult to digest and offers no storyteller advice. Even the combat system with the Withering and decisive attack forms run more smoothly than 2nd edition's Paranoia combat. The mass combat system in 3rd edition is extremely streamlined compared to the complicated mess introduced in 1st and 2nd edition. No, 3rd edition isn't a crunchy game when compared to its predecessors. It is, however, a bloated game. The main issue with 3rd edition, apart from what I've already stated, is the core book's charm design. Characters have too many resources and too many charms to keep track of, and the charms themselves introduce convoluted mechanics like dice tricks. The rules themselves, if you ignore crafting, are for the most part straightforward. If you get over the initial hurdles, you have fewer issues running a game of 3rd edition than a game of 2nd edition, at least in my experience. But it's still a poorly presented game, and many of its flaws are deal breakers for some. Exalted Essence was designed by people who were well aware of 3rd edition's flaws, and they fixed more or less every issue that 3rd edition had. It made some decisions that I wouldn't have made by simplifying the game too much in areas where it didn't need to, and by making other parts unnecessarily complex and convoluted. The whole idea behind bringing back virtues but not tying them to any meaningful mechanics is just something I can't wrap my head around. Exalted Essence also gives you far fewer options than previous games due to the fact that every Exalt type is in the same book. However, ignoring that, I would say that Exalted Essence is the best Exalted game so far when it comes to the rules themselves, I do say that with a bit of hesitation though, since I don't have much experience playing it yet. And even though I say that, I would still play 3rd edition over Exalted Essence any day because of the endless character options. My perfect Exalted game would use some of the systems from Exalted Essence and some of the systems from 3rd edition. I might put something together myself at some point, since I'm no longer under NDA with Onyx Path. I've in theory crafting a 3.5 variant, which I call Invictus, that is meant to use many of the systems introduced in Exalted Essence while keeping some of the complexity from 3rd edition. I probably won't focus on getting it done until I'm done with the core book for Machineborn though. By the way, if you like high power games like Exalted but also like science fiction, you would probably like Machineborn. If you check out my Patreon at the $1 tier, you get access to the PDF as I'm writing it. The book has all of the rules and most of the content in it, and it's perfectly playable in its current state. I'm running a bi-weekly campaign that haven't ran into any issues so far. Also, I originally intended to make a 5th video in the series focusing on the storytelling experience of each edition. I did get a bit burnt out on crunching out these videos though, so I'm going to take a bit of a break from finishing that one and focus on some other videos in the meanwhile. So a 5th video will come at some point, but not for a while. Anyway, regardless of which Exalted edition you prefer, I hope that you have found these videos fair and helpful. If you like content like this, please make sure to like, share, comment and subscribe. Until next time.